Recording.
Okay.
And I'm going to welcome you, Ajay. So this is an interview with Ajay Ponnapalli. Thank you, Ajay, for taking time out to share your research and your experience around remote work. This is all part of our Leading Blended Team series. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I'm not sure if you'd like to begin with just a brief introduction about you as a new Wayne State faculty member, the work that you do, and how it really set the stage for equipping our Wayne State leaders to be mindful of fair and inclusive remote work practices.
Oh, absolutely. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Management and Information Systems at MISB. And funnily enough, I joined Wayne in the middle of the pandemic, so I've never set foot in my office. So remote work is sort of like my norm. And I predominantly do research in the remote work, hybrid work area, trying to understand, what employees experience when they're working part-time away from the office and part-time in the office, whether these experiences differ from folks who are working full-time in the office and also from folks who are working full-time away from the office. So that's largely my area of research. I'm also a leadership scholar, so I try to understand the effect of leaders in trying to help make remote work be more effective. And it just so happened that the pandemic really accelerated interest in my area of research. So my advisor, Ravika Jindran, is considered one of the foremost experts in this area. So I've been working with him and trying to really unpack some of the challenges that organizations and employees and managers and teams have been facing ever since the pandemic really accelerated, global interest in this remote work phenomenon. So yeah, that's a brief, introduction about me. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the challenges that you imagine people may be facing when it comes to working in this new environment.
Absolutely. So with the sudden shift to remote work, I think prior to the pandemic, there are about 26 million-ish individuals who are working remotely, at least once a day, once a week. But then once the pandemic hit, we saw this mass shift of employees having to work from home just to keep operations, going. But even as things come back to normal, I think the number of employees will still be working at least part-time from home or from locations other than the main office is going to be about 50 to 60 million. So we're seeing a big chunk of the US workforce doing that. And some of the challenges that managers have traditionally and more recently been bringing up is the sense of, okay, I'm responsible for my employees. So I need to make sure that they're getting the work done. And for that, I need to monitor them. But then how do I monitor them when they're away from the office? And that relinquishing of control is the biggest challenge that they're facing. And most managers, if you think about it, are kind of like in those middle manager space. So they're responsible for their employees, but they're responsible to some other senior managers. So senior managers want accountability, their employees want, that sense of flexibility. So how do you balance that sort of get my employees what they need, but also let my supervisors know that I've got everything under control? So that's one of the biggest challenges. And the other challenge is, let's say you have a team of 5 and 2 of them are in the office and 3 of them are away from the office. How do you keep the communication going, that sense of community, that sense of collaboration that you want to have amongst a team that really brings out the teamness of working with the group? How do you really bring that to life? That's probably the biggest challenge that managers have been facing. And we're seeing that in terms of interviews. So you can go to Harvard's, HBR articles, you can read Time magazine, you can read, any blog about managers' experiences. And consistently, these are the biggest themes that we keep seeing coming up as challenges that managers are facing.
Yeah, makes sense. I love that you're making this transition between where we were during the pandemic and now as we start to move into this new hybrid work world and begin returning to campus in new ways, that those challenges may continue to remain for managers in some respects.
Absolutely.
How does that look for our employees?
Yeah, and employees, right. Employees too have been struggling throughout this. So it's not just the managers. So when you're working away from the central office, generally the biggest issue that employees face is this lack of structure. So employment in general, and then having an office space gives you that structure. Okay, I'm coming in, I turn on my computer, I have my cup of coffee, I know that I'm going to be here for the next couple of hours. So it kind of gives you the structure about, okay, this is my box and here's when I work. And then, when I leave my box, I'm outside of work. It gives you that set of boundaries. And what hybrid or remote work does is it removes that sense of structure. So now the lines between what is work and what is not work really get blurred. So what we see is employees really struggling to turn on or when they should be a family person or a home person versus when they should be an employee or a manager. So that's sort of like the biggest challenge that we see. And that kind of leads to all kinds of conflicts from the home. So I need to take this conference call, but my kid is crying, or they need to go to like, a game or something, or they just want your attention because you're always at work, or you're always at your computer. So how do you balance work life and family life? So that's where we see the work and family conflicts coming up. But alongside that, a really kind of challenge that employees face is this lack of professional and social kind of connectedness that they have to their colleagues. So if you're in an office and you're sitting with your colleagues and your boss walks by and they're like, "Hey, I need to tap you in for this new task." And that's kind of like what we talk about, this professional development or this professional opportunities. If you're away from the office, you're less likely to be remembered because I see Max, but I don't see James. So I'm just going to give Max the opportunity, right? So that's just an example of how you're missing out on opportunities that otherwise would have been available to you had you been working in the same place as everybody else. And in addition to that, there's this sense of social isolation. If you're not seeing your employees every day, you're out of sight, out of mind. So, you're not taking part in those birthday celebrations, those random conversations you have at the water cooler where you build those friendships. And those are some of the like most common challenges that employees have been reporting. And then more so, we're going to have this trickle over effect that came from COVID, where people are still going to be anxious about coming into work. Yes, I got my vaccine, but do I really want to get COVID? Even if it's not going to be too serious, nobody wants to get sick. And we know that the whole new variants coming up. So there's this sense of anxiety that's going to keep coming up. And now that people have really understood what it means to take care of their families and have time spent with their kids, a lot of folks will not want to come back to work as frequently. So there are going to be these challenges of how do I balance my coming into work a few days a week and not going back? And these challenges are going to keep coming up until we find a good middle ground where employees can balance those personal needs with their needs that are given by the company. So those are some of the big challenges we see, and they're likely going to stay moving forward as well.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So what does all this mean then when we think about where we're standing in this situation here?
So what this essentially comes down to is, and this is kind of reflected in surveys. So I see, if you look at this survey that was conducted, this is pre-COVID, and I think there are some stats that come post-COVID, but since we're looking at hybrid work, let's look at what are the biggest benefits that employees seem to be reporting that comes out of working remotely or hybridly, where you're working some days of the week in the office, some days away from a different location. And that is this ability to have like a flexible schedule. You can work from anywhere. You don't have to commute to work. You can spend time with family. I can take up a hobby. Those 2-3 hours that you're saving from, just sitting in a car or doing nothing is really valuable. And employees seem to, value that quite a bit. But at the same time, there are some struggles that employees seem to have. And surveys of these employees tend to show that as well. So if we transition to the next part of the slide, you'll see that the challenges that they're talking about are the same, like loneliness, not being part of a community, not able to communicate and collaborate, the sense of not being able to unplug from work. So we see these challenges show up from being a remote worker. You have these major benefits, but you also have these downsides. And I think organizations and employees and probably key managers have to find a way to reconcile these two things. Try to play up the positives while trying to play down the negatives. And in the remote work literature, we kind of see these themes recurring again and again. And I'm happy to talk more about them if we actually move on to the next slide. What we do know about remote work is that when it comes to the positives, there are 3 major areas that remote workers kind of hint on what they enjoy about being a hybrid or remote worker. And the first one is having the choice of where I want to work from. And that means, well, okay, so today I might go into the office, but Thursday I'm going to work from home. There's going to be, I don't know, a rally downtown or something, and I want to be away from it. So I'm just going to stay at home. Or, my kid has a game that I can attend at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. So me staying at home is really helpful. So that sense of self-determination of where I'm going to work from, that's a huge benefit. And a lot of employees really latch onto that as a big plus side of hybrid work. Alongside that comes this ability to shift your work schedules in a way that allows you to attend to these work and non-work needs. So when you when you're going to an office, typically it's the, but for lack of a better term, 9 to 5 is the most common work schedule that people maintain. Think what comes along with that. Everybody's at work at the same time, so you have rush hour traffic, right? That means you have you have to plan your 2-3 hours before you get to work. So you're losing those 2-3 hours that you would typically have free to yourself in planning to get to work. So that means I got to wake up at 7. I got to get the kids ready. I got to get their breakfast and stuff ready. I got to take have my coffee and then drive to work in the middle of rush hour traffic. But when you have scheduling flexibility, you can kind of circumnavigate all of that. You can kind of push it all out of the way and just focus on, I'm going to wake up at this time, I'm going to start working at this time, and I don't need to drive to work. So that sense of scheduling flexibility is a big bonus that employees experience when they're working remotely, at least part of the time. And then there's also this work-related flexibility. If you're away from the watchful eye of the manager or your colleagues who are interrupting you, then you can determine how you want to get the work done. Whereas if you are in an office the whole time and you have employees coming and knocking on your door, your colleagues knocking on your door, or your manager saying, I need you to do it this way or that way, that is sort of like a big issue when it comes to choosing how you want to get your work done. So these are like the key things that managers want to keep in mind when they think about what are the upsides and how they can be applied to employees. And as I discussed earlier, the downsides to remote work are largely professional and social isolation. Professional isolation being, excluded from informational networks when, managers simply do not see employees in the office. They're out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. So it's unlikely that they would remember to include them in conversations. There might be decisions that are being made at the team level, but you're not part of that team, because you're away. So you weren't included in that conversation. You have that. And then the social isolation element is you miss out on these social activities, these informal chats that are typically, how you build your friendships when you see him in the office, in the kitchen, having his lunch, and you walk by like, hey, what you getting to get talking about, what they did. And, oh, I do that too. Maybe we can have, we can get together. And that's how you build those relationships. So you're missing out on all of those things when you're working at least away from the office a couple of days of the week. So kind of want to keep these two sense of pluses and minuses in mind as a manager, so you can really, hone in on which aspects need to be played up and which need to be played down. So yeah, as the literature is pretty clear on these benefits that you get from working remotely or hybrid for a couple of days of the week. You have these flexibility benefits that come up, and at the same time, the same remote work that's providing these benefits in terms of flexibility is also giving these detriments that are taking away from you, and that's the sense of isolation that you get. And funnily enough, we see that isolation plays out even if you're working 1 day a week away from the office. People tend to feel isolated. It's not just that folks who are spending all 5 days away from the office, so let's say it's a team of 4 and one guy or girl is spending all 5 days away. Actually shows up even for folks who are spending a day away from the office, that sense of disconnect, because I don't know, maybe it's fear of missing out. There could be all kinds of things that are happening psychologically. But we see that these negatives really play out for folks who are even working a day away from the office. And similarly, we see the benefits playing out even if you have that 1 day. That 1 day I'm at home, I'm going to be really productive because I can just ignore all these hassles. So we know that there are key benefits and there are key detriments that come from remote work. And these in turn really predict how effective employees can be. The benefits really drive, positive, really increase performance and effectiveness, and the detriments really take away from it. And in many ways, these two kind of cancel each other out. So what you really want to do as a manager is you want to enhance the positives while trying to, reduce the negatives as much as possible. That way you're maximizing the effectiveness of your employees in a remote environment. And the literature, actually, if you go to the next slide, really shows this. So all your upsides from increased flexibility, you have better work-life balance, you're more productive, you're more engaged, you have more satisfaction, reduced stress. The exact positives are reflected in the negatives. So you have worse work-life balance, you're less productive, you have lower engagement. So the key benefits that you're getting tend to be from increased flexibility, tend to be taken away from increased isolation. So really what managers need to focus on is trying to enhance that sense of flexibility while also reducing that sense of isolation, because you can keep getting these upsides while minimizing these downsides.
Yeah. Would some even think when you say that they cancel each other out, that we shouldn't be thinking about hybrid work? What do you think about that? Is there Is there
Key question.
value in having managers really manage the upsides and minimize the downsides and go to all that effort?
Um, I I tend to think that hybrid work is here to stay. I think the idea of having to be in the office 5 days a week, um, for certain jobs is absolutely necessary. Like a doctor is not going to promote, conduct remote surgery. I don't think we have the technology available for that yet. But in many ways, there are a lot of jobs that actually allow for increased efficiency, even when you're working in a hybrid environment. So what we do know is, despite these things, the downsides and the upsides coming out from the literature, that remote workers on average are more productive, are more efficient, are more happy with their jobs, are more likely to stay, are going to be more committed, are less likely to get burned out than employees who are spending traditional 5 days in the office. So we know that there are big upsides, and this is I'm actually part of a study that is taking stock of over 111 studies conducted in the remote work literature. We're putting it all together, looking at all the results from these different studies. So we have about 300,000 people. So looking at results from 300,000 people, we know that there are clear benefits to remote work. And by remote work, I'm talking about hybrid working arrangements, where it's not just employees spending, the whole time away from the office. We're looking at the range, the more time you spend away from the office versus just 1 or 2 days away from the office. And in general, what we're seeing is that there are key upsides to it, both in terms of employee outcomes, where employees are satisfied and they have better work and life and family, outcomes. But organizations are also benefiting when they see employees not turning over as much. Their employees are more committed, they're more engaged, they're more productive. So I think it's not that managers should think about it as, why should we even deal with remote work when employees are productive? I think managers should approach it as, okay, so this seems to be working. How do we make it better? And how do I get it to a point where my employees and I can really work together as a unit, despite where they're working? Like, is location really what's stopping us from being the best versions of ourselves? And I think if you approach it from that standpoint, you can really address some of these downsides and really highlight the upsides.
There's so many benefits, you say, of working like this. It really appears to be the new way, the new normal for us, right? So how
Absolutely.
do managers get ready for that? What are some strategies you can offer them?
Yeah, funnily enough, the recommendations that we're seeing that are most effective are not these ideas that are alien to us. It's just we need to be aware of them and be mindful of them. So don't be a controlling boss. And what I mean by that is, it's very easy for well-meaning managers to go from being a good boss who's keeping in touch to somebody who's micromanaging and who's incessantly trying to keep track of what's happening, of what your employees are doing. So a simple example is, let's say, remote work, pre-installation of a remote work arrangement, employees are in the office, managers feel like, okay, I don't need to see what Tim and Jane are doing. They're going to get their job done. I'll just keep taps on them every now and again. I'll just, knock on the door and see how they're doing. But now that they're out of the office and some of them are working from home a couple of days of the week, all of a sudden they feel like I got to keep sending emails or keep asking them for daily updates, or, every 2 hours check in to see if they're working, because, either my bosses think that they're slacking off or employees think they're slacking off. So a well-intentioned manager can very easily go from being a good manager to a micromanager in the flip of a sec, like in a toss of a coin, because all of a sudden you're just like, okay, I need to check on what they're doing, and you're gonna keep sending emails and you're gonna keep calling them. So have the confidence that your employees who are productive in the office, more likely than not, are going to be very productive, when they're outside the office. But at the same time, the best way to make sure that they're keeping track and reaching their objectives is doing just that. Set your objectives very early. Say that, okay, today or this week, these are our goals. We need to hit XYZ targets. And as long as you're setting these targets and you're asking employees to, make sure that they're hitting these targets, let them figure out how they go and get it done. Of course, this is not something that every organization can do, but to the extent that you can give them the freedom to set their own schedules and they're not encumbered by having to, meet a client deadline at exactly a certain time in a day. Like, if you have clients who are working in different areas or in different time zones, that's a different thing altogether. But once you set expectations and you set goals, let your employees, reach those objectives in any which way they can, and start figuring out what are ways that we can reach these objectives faster, and keep revising those objectives. Just because you said it once doesn't mean that has to be the target through and out, right? You can keep revising those targets, discuss with your employees, hey, did this work for you? Do we need to revise, whether we need to extend our timeline for this, or, if we're hitting our objectives much faster, can we think about doing things differently? So keep having those conversations with your employees. That way they're part of the conversation of setting their own objectives, which will, invigorate them, which is kind of like the work-related flexibility. But at the same time, you're putting that confidence in them, which will kind of make them feel like they need to reciprocate that trust that you're building, that you have in them, right? And probably most importantly, just be flexible. And by flexible, I mean be available to your employees. If they're working 2-3 days away from the central office, then be available to them to ask questions about, hey, can I move this day to, like, if I'm working from home on Mondays, can next week I need to make it Thursday? Sure, Thursday is fine by me. See that you can be that flexible boss, and sometimes it might not work out. It's not like that works out every single week, but having that flexibility, knowing that you have a boss who's willing to listen to your challenges and is understanding of your challenges and can accommodate them, that's a huge benefit. So even those weeks where you're unable to accommodate them, more likely than not, employees will be like, all right, I can't get everything. So, maybe this week, there's certain restrictions that I can't, be as flexible, and that's okay. They'll latch onto that, and they'll be appreciative of the times that they do get to work flexibly. So it's these simple things that managers just need to keep, be mindful of. Yeah.
Yeah, a really strong focus on the unique needs of individuals, I'm hearing you say.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's easy for managers to forget the fact that employees are unique individuals. So if you're away from the office, the assumption is that, oh, anybody who's working remotely has the exact same challenges, but that's not necessarily true. We have different backgrounds, different, family sizes, different home sizes. So not everybody who's working remotely or, for the few days that they are away from the office has a separate home office, with a wall where they're keeping their kids out of bay. It's usually a parent sitting next to the dining table with their kids playing in the playroom and, all, chaos ensuing all around them. So you need to be mindful of these different challenges that your different employees have, and having that sense of that the knowledge that, okay, there are all these different sets of challenges that employees might be experiencing, and keeping that at the back of your mind so you can target, unique challenges as and when they come up will really make you a better boss. It'll allow employees to feel like you are empathetic and that the manager really understands the different kinds of challenges that they're experiencing. It builds that trust with the manager. So it's important that, it's not a one size fits all when it comes to remote work for employees, and different employees have different challenges. They might have elderly care that they need to focus on, or young child care that they need to focus on. Some employees just simply, live 2 hours away and they don't want to commute every day, which, as we know, there's research to suggest that more time spent in commute leads to really bad outcomes at work. So maybe that one day a week where they get the reprieve is totally worth it and they might appreciate it. So just keeping that in mind is absolutely critical.
Mhm, mhm. So we're talking about managing the upsides as well as managing the downsides. What additional strategies might you suggest managers think about here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've kind of talked about how do you enhance or really focus on flexibility for employees, but at the same time, you kind of want to play down or minimize the downsides as much as possible. And this ties into the idea of being a micromanager a little bit, or avoiding a micromanaging style, but having frequent communication. But what kind of communication? Information sharing is probably the most important. So if you remember, we were talking about professional isolation where employees feel like they're out of the information network. So getting communications from your manager frequently, but about information on the team or what's happening with the organization, is a key way that you can help build that sense of inclusion. So that way, even if employees are, away from the office 1 or 2 days a week, they still know what's happening in the organization. So including everybody who needs to be on particular communications, or even if you had a conversation with folks who are in the office, having a quick email, just drafting a quick email saying that, hey, we just discussed this. I wanted to keep you in the loop. Here you go. And a quick summary email, just letting everybody know what's happening, is a good way of letting employees stay connected to the organization and to the unit, even when they're working away for a couple of days of the week. And, encourage employees, celebrate your victories, let them know that, they're doing a good job, regardless of whether they're in the office or away from the office. I think another key thing that managers can do is help employees really balance that, the boundaries between work and life. So sometimes employees, simply by given the opportunity to work from home, will work way too hard. And that sounds like a good thing from an organization standpoint, but I mean, way more hours than they're required to. They get burned out really quick. They feel like they always need to be connected. So even if they get an email after work hours, an employee might feel like, oh, wait, I got the chance to work from home. I need to make myself available at all hours. And that's not the case if you were in the office. After you leave the office, you're pretty much like disconnected. But for folks who are working from home, they might feel, obligated to be always connected. So emphasizing the need for boundary management, and this is something that I struggle with, and my department chair really told me that you need to set boundaries. Like, you cannot keep working yourself to the bone, because then we want you here for the next 40 years and we don't want you to get burned out in 2 years, right? So it's really important that you understand that there is work and there's life and there are boundaries, and you should be able to help maintain those boundaries. And then to help that sense of social connection, a good idea could be, and I've read some organizations doing this, is they have planned weekly meetings, maybe bi-weekly. Some teams meet every week, some teams meet every day, depending on what works for the team. Having planned interactions is important so that everybody gets that sense of connection and community. And some teams even do a first 10-minute complete informal, where they're just personal updates, right? Before we get down to business for today's discussion, tell me what's going on in your life. So people quickly talk about celebrations, and that tends to happen in meetings. So you're just replicating that, but now in a virtual environment. So you're just letting people, let them know what's happening in their personal lives, any celebrations, and then get to discussing, the matters at hand. So I think that allows for even more sense of community, even if you're out of the office, and some folks are working from home and some folks are working in the office. That way you're having those social interactions. It's not the exact same thing as being in the office altogether, but at least you're building that sense of community. And I think managers can do a really good job of identifying ways that different employees can work together. So if they see that there's common ground that allows employees to work on a project together, and putting them together, regardless of where they're working from, would really help build that sense of community and collaboration within the team. So these are like the big, ideas. They're not completely unheard of. It's just being mindful of them, bringing them to the forefront, and keep thinking about it on a consistent manner. I think managers can practice things. I mean, managers are humans. We're not thinking about they're not superhuman, right? So as humans, we focus on one thing for a little bit, and then it becomes normal, and then we tend to lose track of it. So being mindful of it, so it's always at the back of your mind, and you keep thinking of it. Remind yourself that, okay, wait, is everybody okay? How are folks doing? Are folks in the office doing okay? Are folks at home doing okay? Is there a day of the week where you require everybody to be in the office so that you do have that sense of community? Because you might have group members who, some of them are working from home on Mondays and others are working from home on Thursdays, right? So when do we bring everybody back into the office for that one day a week? And you could try and think about strategies like that. It's just listening, paying attention, put your ear to the ground, see what's happening with your employees, be empathetic, understand that people have challenges, and that we're coming off this really stressful 1 year of crazy COVID stuff. It's unprecedented, and there are going to be some of those trickle over effects. So you need to make sure that even as we return to quote unquote normal, the new normal is going to be something we still need adjusting to. So be empathetic, understand that some people have had traumatic experiences. Some people just spent the pandemic sitting at home and enjoying themselves. But you're going to have the whole range of experiences. So bringing people together and letting them understand that we're a unit, we're meant to work together, and we're going to try and come together as a team, and really embracing that team spirit and leading from that perspective is quite important as we transition to a hybrid environment.
Yeah. That's a great segue as we think about we're managing individuals and balancing the unique needs of individuals as well as the work and those we serve. And then we have to think about how do we scale that up so that we manage teams, groups of people, and ensure that they're interacting in a way that's going to help achieve the goals that you have for your group. What additional ideas do you have as you think about managing teams and displaying these values?
I think the most important thing, and it sounds simple enough, but the key element that makes teams work is trust. And I think what leaders can do is, in addition to building individualized relationships with their employees, so getting to know your employees is one aspect, and understanding their unique challenges and their individual challenges is one thing, but kind of building that sense of community and that trust, not just with each member, but also among members, is absolutely important. And once you build that trust where employees feel like, all right, my boss has my back regardless of XYZ circumstance, then they feel more psychologically connected to the unit. They feel more connected to the organization. They feel like they can take risks in terms of getting the work done, even when they traditionally might not feel that way. Employees will typically reciprocate a lot stronger in through hard work, more hours, which again might necessarily be a good thing. It's not bad for a company to have employees working longer hours, but it could link to long-term, consequences. So, but employees will really feel like they need to give back to a manager or to an organization that really builds that sense of trust and has that sense of faith in their employees that they're going to get the job done. So largely speaking, you would just want to take steps that help foster that sense of trust that allows employees to feel psychologically safe that, even if I was to choose, not to work remotely on XYZ days per week, that, it's not going to affect my promotion outcomes. It's not going to affect my ability to connect with my team members. It's not going to affect my performance, and that my team knows that, and my manager knows that, and my company knows that. You just want to build that sense of trust in your employees that allows them to really exercise that sense of freedom when they are working from home, because the whole benefit of working from home is the psychological freedom that, yes, I'm working for this team, but I have more flexibility in the way I do this work. And I think it's key that organizations don't lose sight of employees when they're working from home. It's not like they are not connected to the company. It's just that they have this new sense of freedom that comes from the boundaries that they're in, which is their home more often than not, right? So how do you really allow your employees to exercise that sense of freedom while still maintaining that connection to the company and their units? That's what's key. And I think what we've discussed so far allows managers to really hone in on some of those ideas.
Thank you, AJ. I heard wonderful themes of really guiding principles, being flexible, being empathetic, as we really find ways to include others in fair and equitable ways, but really uniquely suited to the individuals themselves. So thank you so much for sharing some of your research, some of your insights on this topic as we work together in brand new ways and learn and grow together as a team in this hybrid world.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. And thank you for having me.